Okay, we are here to call to order the budget meeting at 4:05. Okay, so workshop information to be covered includes PreK Expansion, review of overall school budget and discussion of potential revisions. Then Articles 1 through 11, regular instruction, special education, career and technical education, other instruction, student and staff support, systems and school administration, transportation, facilities, debts, all other, and adult education.
That about covers it. So following our meeting last Wednesday, we've given you a lot of information, probably information overload, as we've tried to roll out this budget. Last Wednesday, we focused on the ESSER positions. And one thing that we've done is we've tried to show you as we've walked things along. So I felt after that meeting, Cheryl Fournier and I were talking, and I felt like it might be good to kind of give us almost a one sheet. It's one sheet and it runs over a little. And we felt before we jump into the pre-K presentation that it would probably be wise to at least start you with this document as of February 7th. And so with that, it kind of lists everything out by what is in the budget that is new. These are new positions that are in the budget. Then we've identified areas that are in the budget that we're recommending be paid by carryover. There are a number of positions that we started out in our local budget and have since moved into the ESSER budget, so we've listed those out. There are also a couple positions and a couple of items that we had in the local budget that we've since moved back out to our CARES and Perkins budget. And then on the back, we've also got some items that are in the budget. And so to help you get an idea when we talk about pre-K in the expansion, we felt that it would be important to kind of lay this out ahead of time because the numbers can get probably a little bit confusing. What we had done up until tonight, we had broken out the pre-K by each elementary school. We're looking to expand and add one pre-K classroom in each one of our elementary schools for a total of 3. So we combine those, as you see, that total cost comes out to $553,000. Also looking at transportation costs for pre-K, we've got those listed as well. What you're going to find is we did receive a grant, and that grant totals $321,500. And so that's going to be something that is coming out of this cost. I think that's important for you to know that now in terms of what the impact on this budget will be. Okay, so there's a $321,000 that's going to be put into a revenue account.
So that's going to come out of the expense because it's going to go into a special revenue account, which is a different fund. So you'll see that money show up in a special revenue fund now.
So if you look at that, along with the other things that are still in the budget as far as additions, that total now comes out to $659,635, and that is a 1.2% increase over last year's budget. When you look at the carryover items that total just over $200,000, that comes out to 0.4%. The positions that we move from the local budget into ESSER, those come out to a total of $527,000, and that's a 0.9% increase. If you look at what we've moved from the local back into CARES and Perkins, that comes under just under $170,000, and that's 0.3%. So hopefully that's kind of helping you in your mind keep this somewhat organized. as we are starting to show you what is entitled in that budget, and that's as of today, February 7th. Any questions on that? Because I thought that would be helpful to you, at least to see this. I think we'll come back and revisit this after we do the pre-K presentation, but I wanted to hopefully organize it in this way that might be able to help you follow things.
So my math without a calculator is, so this total, what you're on this sheet of paper is 3.1% increase. When you add it all up, between 0.1, 0.3, 0.9, 0.4, and 1.2.
So for the in ESSER budget, that was reduced from our local budget and actually put into ESSER. So that reduced our expense.
So what's the total right now? Is it 3.1 like I
So we're at 3.8% after the pre-K.
And that's for
For total expense.
For total expense.
That's with, turn the page, that's with everything that says they're in the budget. Those first two sections are in the budget. The next two sections are not in the budget. When you do, we had a 6.5% increase when we started this. We're down to 3.8%.
And we'll get the, we'll pass
I get
that
that.
out to you afterwards, so you can find.
Well, are you following up with another category here, another week, February 7th?
We kind of broke that one down and just said, this is February 7th.
Yep.
That's what we did. We took that one to follow you out, and now we're just down to February 7th. Do you think we should
I can-
pass this one out?
Yeah, it would help me. Give
Are
me
you-
the end game and then walk me back.
Follow.
Which one do you think we should do?
Right.
The one with the revenue or one
So they took
without? Just this
all
one,
of
right?
this
Yeah.
stuff.
I think
and
they only want to know
They
expense.
took out all the colors and all the different whatever and said, as
That
of
includes your,
February 7th, with all the
additional
discussions that we've
subsidy
had,
and
this
your
is where we are now.
carryover.
I know, it'd be nice to be consistent
that one.
with the trend.
So you go from
I
this
think
one-
once you
okay,
look at this,
no, wait
I
a minute.
summarized it a
What-
little
where-
easier.
Where'd we go?
Yep.
So I took the report that Jonathan had just held up, got rid of a lot of stuff because I think everybody was getting caught up on the changes going across. So instead, I just tried to summarize it better. So if you look at this sheet, the starting point was the $3.6 million or a 6.5% increase. That's the very top. During the first day, we took Tier 3 and Tier 2 out, which is the next two little sections, and I have a subtotal after each one. So after we took out Tier 3, it went down to 6.2%. After we took out Tier 2, it went down to 5.7% increase, or 3.2 million. So then we removed the health insurance increase, which is approximately $551,000. It brings it down to a 4.7% increase in expenses. We added those two support and transition tech, ed tech positions. So that brought it up to 4.9% increase, or 2.7% million. And then we talked about a couple changes last week, which was taking out these 4 positions and moving them either to ESSER or CARES. And that brought us down to a 4.4% increase, or just over just under 2.5 million. And then after we do this pre-K adjustment, moving out the expenses out of local and into a special revenue fund of $321,500, our expense increase will be at just over 2.1 million, or 3.8%. So that's, and we got rid of those couple revenue items because that was confusing the issue a little bit. So we were trying to make it, simplify it a little bit. And so this is, the percentages are based off last year's expense total. It's a percentage of that. So right now, we're at a 3.8% increase.
For expenses
For
based on last year's.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
So we're down just over 1.5 million that we've taken out of the budget. Make sense? Does that help you, Jen? Because I know that's kind of what we talked about. You were. Turn the page was 3.3%, 1.8 million, I believe. No.
Okay, so then,
Oh, I can check. Yeah, 1.841 would have been turn the page.
So when you look at that 2,164,261, or 3.8% increase to expenses, understand that 1,841,869 were just for us to turn the page for salary and benefit commitments, to keep the budget as is, to turn the page.
When you say to turn the page, you mean to say revenue neutral, just status quo?
Status quo, no new positions,
Turn the
no
page is a new,
changes.
kind of a new lingo apparently
Yep.
this year, so.
We kind of wanted to give you that as a starting point before we jumped into the pre-K discussion, so you had a better handle maybe on where things are at, and it might help you also better follow and understand. It's still going to be some numbers being thrown at you, because I'm not sure there's any other way around that.
so,
A couple of times, I'm kind of half-masked here. Special ed, social worker under Tier 3, this is potential ESSER. Tier 2, a new music teacher, possible ESSER. I don't know the difference between potential and possible, but is that supposed to be the same thing, or
Different day.
Huh?
Different day.
different day, different thought?
Yeah.
Okay. So who decides whether we're going to have a music teacher or a special ed social worker? When does that decision get made?
Well, that's something we've got to decide coming up. I will say that as we're getting ready for Wednesday's presentation, which will be focused on special education and focused on expansion of the bridge, you're going to see some other adjustments to where that is. So we're holding off on that rather than do it now, which really would confuse you. But we met with Stacy Bissell, the Director of Special Ed, and so there's going to be some changes and tweaks to that as we start to look at our most updated numbers for that. So I wish that wasn't the case, but it is, but I don't want to confuse you.
Well, you've done a fine job.
Yeah.
But it's, I mean, you live, it's, I probably come across a little fresh, but it's a lot to take in for us, and we're here more than the average bear. You guys live at 8 to 5 amongst all the other tasks you all do. So, and I support that. That's your job. But if somebody said to me why they're moving a music teacher out, I really support that. I was like, I'm not sure. There's not enough money. Well, to everybody out there, something is special to them, and I just think the arts always take it on the chin, and so I'm a little supportive of those artsy music things.
This is all very fluid.
Yep.
This is as a process as we're going down. Our hope is that I don't expect to make any decisions tonight on pre-K. There's a lot to take in. I think after Wednesday's meeting on special ed and expansion to the bridge, that'll be a lot to take in as well. But I know in the budget workshop that we have scheduled next week on Monday and Wednesday, I think at that time is when we can then start to be able to look at things coming into a little bit more focus. At that time, I hope to have an update on our health insurance, and I also hope to have an update at least from the city in terms of some of the expectations of the things that they're looking for as well. But I think we're doing our best to kind of present information and kind of move things along a little bit, not for any finality, but just to be able to start having that process zero in, rather. All set to jump into the pre-K presentation for now?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, so want to thank Steve Bouchier's, I think it was back in, was it November that we were back in front of the school committee as we entertained the grant? And at that time, we made a presentation. Steve did a nice job outlining that. We did go out and apply for the grant. We were one of 12 school districts to receive that. And then last Thursday, Steve, Cheryl, and I had a Zoom meeting with the Maine Department of Education representatives for pre-K. And through that, we had an adjustment to our grant. It was an adjustment that went against us in terms of us receiving less funds than what we anticipated. But we have since worked hard to come back and adjust our budget accordingly. And I think as we get into that, Steve can highlight why we had that difference in our grant number. And then we'll walk ourselves through that. We're going to try to do a little bit of a recap in terms of what we talked about with the grant. I think it's important for you to understand where we're coming from as far as why are we looking at expanding pre-K. And then we can start to get into some of the numbers as we've tried to be able to look at that. That will show you what the impact is going to be on this year's local budget. And then we're also done our best to try to outline what it's going to look like for future costs, because we do have some grant funding that's assisting this year, but that's not going to be something that is always something that we can count on. So with that, I'll hand it over to Steve, and we can get started.
Okay, let's jump in. So PreK Expansion. So as Matt mentioned, one of the first things we want to just talk about is the why. Whenever we implement something new or stop doing something, it's about why are we doing certain things. And so as you look at pre-K, really it's about the social emotional development for our youngsters. And that's really what it's about, social emotional development. And I think that that is important as we begin to talk about the possibility of implementing pre-K. It's really about social emotional development. That's at the forefront of what they do. Part of it is teaching kids when they're in our program, teaching them the ability to follow directions, encouraging that physical development. Through that social emotional work, teaching kids how to follow directions. There is an academic component to pre-K, but really reducing the risk for the need for special education services. Oftentimes when students come into our schools in K1, 2, oftentimes they're in need of speech services. And they're in need of speech services not because they necessarily have a special education learning disability beyond speech and language. It's just they haven't had that opportunity. They haven't had the opportunity to engage in conversation. And so really, I see that as the biggest, as we look at special education referrals down the road, a reduction in our speech and language referrals by getting kids in there early. And it's an equity piece. Really, in a high poverty community, it's looking at providing equal opportunities for kids, and it's an equity piece. So lots of benefits for pre-K. Want to go on to the next slide? So as we think about pre-K, we do have a committee that has been formed. There's a pre-K advisory committee. We have started to meet on a regular basis. We have talked about things such as scheduling, what does the curriculum look like, I've recently had a meeting with Ledgmere Transportation. What is transportation going to look like? What is food service going to look like for these kiddos? So we do have a committee that is meeting on a regular basis that is really nuts and bolts on the ground, making sure that we have successful implementation. So the importance of pre-K and what we're currently doing to get it underway. Now, looking at the grant. The grant funding comes from the main American Rescue Plan, the ARP allocation, and the goal of the grant from the DOE is to expand existing programs or to start up new programs. In order to qualify for this funding, to be eligible, we had to do one of those things, either expand or start a new program. This is for a one-year period. They were very upfront. This is a one-year period. We're required to document how we are going to use the grant funding with other funding sources to expand. So what are we going to put up front for local money? What money is coming from state funds? What are we going to use for our federal title allocations? So there had to be a variety of funding sources. And then the other piece of that is sustainability. With any grant, once the grant funding goes away, how are we going to sustain these expenses to keep the pre-K program up and running? And like Matt mentioned, we met with the DOE last week, and we are currently in the process of finalizing exactly what those numbers look like moving forward. So if we look at pre-K.
And I'll jump
Go ahead.
in just to say, as we're doing that, nothing's been finalized yet.
Right.
This is all just preliminary work. I think one thing that you noticed back when we met in the fall, I know that one of the concerns that I had about rolling out pre-K was the timing of that with everything that was going on. And I know that when we were talking about doing it, the response that we received was very positive, that people realized the impact and the positive impact that a pre-K program can have. And so there's been that, and then as Steve mentioned, with the advisory committee that has also been meeting with that, we're not putting the cart before the horse, but we're doing all of our due diligence to be able to try to come back and set this up for that.
Yeah, and I think Matt mentioned putting the cart before the horse. The work that we are doing with this advisory committee is work that, regardless of when we decide to start pre-K in Sanford, this is good work that is going to be useful down the road if we determine not to go. So just to mention that. John?
John?
I had a quick question. When you use the term moving forward, and Matt, you had just said something, are you talking about the second year of funding where that is going to come from?
We'll talk about that. That's part
Okay.
of the presentation that's coming. We're going to try to break it down so you can see the impact on this year and then also what it means going forward.
Do you want to go to the next slide? So just to remind folks what we have currently. So currently, we have 32 full-day students over at the Head Start program. That's 16 students in 2 separate classrooms. We pay Head Start, we contract with them to provide the service. And then in addition, we have our program at SRTC, which is 2 half-day programs that if we were at full capacity, we would be at 16 students in the morning and 16 students in the afternoon.
And when Steve says we contract with Head Start, we contract with them, we collect the subsidy for those 32 students. We get the state subsidy for those 32 students, but we contract with Head Start to be able to deliver the pre-K services for those 32 kids.
And so what we're proposing in the budget for next year is to expand our existing programs to 96 slots. So that would be continuing the relationship we have with Head Start with 32 students, SRTC's program moving from a half-day program to a full-day program with 16 students, and then starting a program at MCS for 16, CGL for 16, and Sanford Pride Elementary School for 16. So that would be 96 slots. Now, the DOE, when we met with the DOE last week, as they looked at our grant application and they looked at our budget, there was clarification in terms of how many students were actually involved in the program. Originally, we were thinking 32. We're adding 32 more students. And they said, actually, it's 48 students. We have 48 students that will be in new pre-K classrooms. So those programs at MCS, CGL, Sanford Pride Elementary, those are the new programs. So when we talk about the project tonight and talk about the budget, that's what we're talking about for those 3 programs. Does that make sense?
And so you can tell that we've gone from 32 at SRTC, remember those were half-day options, to just 16, which is a full-day option. So that would be 16 less students. And that was something that came out of our workshop in the fall, that we were talking about the idea about equity and the idea that we anticipate that there would be families that would very much want, if the opportunity was there, would want a full-day option rather than half-day.
Next slide, Beth. So this is a proposal, budget proposal, for the pre-K expansion. So we're looking from the state and local side of things. The cost would be $304,000. That would pay for the 3 teachers at each one of our elementary schools at an estimated amount of $258,000. That includes salaries and benefits. Instructional materials and supplies of $3,000. That'd be $1,000 for each school. And that's really for the assessment piece that we will need for pre-K. And then program instructional support. Program instructional support is someone to provide support to the teachers, feedback to the teachers, to support students, to support family engagement, and to support instruction. Looking at a $43,000 salary and benefits there. Looking at, there's a variety of options of how we could go about structuring that position. We could look at marrying it or piggybacking it with another position, such as maybe a literacy coach that we have. So half-time literacy coach, half-time program instructional support for pre-K. Where does that funding come from? Our literacy coaches, instructional coach funds come from our title funds. They come from our federal funds, and so it's not out of the local budget, it would be out of the federal funds. So we could look at doing that possibility. We could look at strictly doing advertising for a half-time support position out of this budget. That's one option. The preference would be to piggyback it off a current position we have to provide the most support. The other piece about that we talked about, why is that piggybacking it with a literacy coach? Why is that enticing to us? Because that would provide a literacy coach in each one of our elementary schools. Currently, we have 2 literacy coaches, and so if we use some of our federal funds, use these funds, piggyback, that could provide us with a 3rd elementary literacy coach. So the money's there, just how do we structure that? Yet to be determined.
John, did
Look-
you have a? Sorry.
No, thanks for reminding me that I had a question. Because, Steve, I had a question, you kind of explained it, but my mind gets further down. I keep wanting to look at the back page for the answer, because I worry about after the grant's gone. I've always worried about grants. And then the other piece of it is, you talk about 96 pre-K students, regardless of how they come to us in this formula. But kindergarten today has 240 students. So it's a little more than, it's a third of the kids roughly that will have some help, but there's a heck of a lot more kids the following year so do we anticipate having a pre-K of more than 96 someday?
So, good questions.
Thanks.
So the 96, I think we are looking at expanding our program this year, but down the road, if the funds are there, the goal would be to make universal pre-K access open to anybody that wanted to attend our pre-K program. As programs get started in communities, oftentimes what you will see is they start small and then they expand. Number one, making sure that they're offering a high-quality program, that they're able to really meet the needs of kids that are in front of them right then and there, and also to get the word out to the community that says, hey, that's a program you want your kiddo in. And as time goes on, those you're going to have increased demand for seats in your program. So oftentimes what you'll see is communities, they start slow and then they expand. Are we ever going to have a one-to-one match in terms of all the students in kindergarten are going to be our students in pre-K? I don't ever see that happening in the near future because you have families that currently are in a good situation where they have a pre-K option for their child privately, and they're comfortable with that. I know with my own son, when he was a 4-year-old, the town we live in, they offer universal pre-K. We had an option. Do we send him to universal pre-K or do we keep him where he's at? And at the time, we said, he's thriving, he's doing well. Actually, he's a little on the younger side, a little more on the immature side, so we think this is a better fit for him. So I think it just provides options for families as they move on. The big piece that I think in our community, the biggest piece is, for working families, it also, I didn't list it on the slide, but for working families, it's a resource for them. Daycare, paying for daycare out of pocket is outrageous. And so it is a financial resource for them. And the position, John, you mentioned when the position goes away, you know, that instructional support position, part of the thing is we bring pre-K into our schools. We need to make sure that those pre-K teachers have support. We need to make sure those classrooms get off on the right foot. And we need to make sure that they're getting that targeted, specialized support from somebody who has some experience. So that's why that position's there. Down the road, will we need to continue that position? Probably for a while. But down the road, there's a potential that it could be absorbed into the regular administrative structure we have with that. But it's just getting started. We need to make sure that somebody's has their eye on the ball, making sure that we're getting that support that they need.
So many questions. And that piece that you just said was kind of where my mind was at when I said a couple of weeks ago that I'm in favor of pre-K. I don't know of anybody that wouldn't be in favor of pre-K. I just worry about the affordability.
Yeah.
And one thing you said a minute ago was some of the title money, we may have to maybe dip into that in the future, which is probably already underfunded. And this instructional person might be blended into some current staffing. My rationale for being opposed to pre-K at this time is the current staff, the system as a whole is already maybe a little tapped out, and all of society is, you know. So I just worry about adding more. Yet I recognize that pre-K is necessary in our community, if not many others. So it's a tough conversation. I'm good.
Do you want to pull the slides back up, Ed? Okay. Any other questions before I do the last column?
I guess I would just like to add that I echo those concerns, for sure. And spacing and just burnout from teachers and, you know, how the elementary schools really feel about taking this on and, yeah, all the issues that you just brought up. Just didn't want you to be there floating along. Jen?
I just wanted to loop back around what you were saying about childcare. It's expensive, yes, but it's also not even available. So I think we need to recognize that point. Additionally, I guess I kind of sit on the other side because everything that has been brought to me thus far in budget process is telling me that this is what building administrators want, is the pre-K program. So it feels like there's missing pieces of the puzzle when folks are, you know, advocating that possibly there's burnout or possibly there's overcrowding or these things or other things, because I would think that those were things that were discussed with our building admins when they brought what they wanted to the table for the budget. We've already discussed that they did not put in ed techs,
And I believe you said that they didn't do that because they were advocating for pre-K.
I think in terms of the hierarchy of the priorities, them trying to get that early intervention, regardless of how spaces are concerned and how burnout and all of those pieces, our understanding is that they very much still understand the benefits of us trying to have these students come into us. It's going to be long-term benefits that are going to be helpful, that if we don't have unlimited resources, that's where they'd prioritize. Steve, you've been meeting regularly with them. I think that, is that fair to say, that they are supportive of pre-K?
Yeah, I think they see it as early intervention. You know, as we talked about early intervention, I think when you talk about space, when you talk about burnout of staff, I do think that's real. I do think that's real, but I always look at, through this pandemic, we try to move forward and have progress. And I think next year's a new year. There's a sense of optimism. I think if you talk to folks in the past couple of weeks, I think you sense that, okay, we're going to get through this. You know, when contact tracing came off, you know, you could feel the COVID numbers going down. You can feel everybody's breathing a little bit. And so I do hear what you're saying in terms of that. But there is also that sense of optimism in the future and moving on from that. So, but they are supportive. We've talked about space, and there's some, in two of the schools, there's definitely space. In the third school, we're looking for some options. But there
We'll
are
talk
options
more
out there.
about space as we get into this, because that's something that's coming up that we recognize is a concern.
So looking at the grant request, and I'll just talk you through this a little bit. The original request we had was for $321,500. That was the original grant request when we sent it in at the end of October, beginning of November. After our discussion on Friday, based on our EPS allocation, we had to reduce our grant request from 321 down, had to reduce it by $59,735. So our new grant request is $261,665. The grant will pay for the 3 ed techs' salaries, which is $148,465.
And benefits.
That's salaries and benefits. That was reduced a tiny bit. Instructional materials, we have $36,000 as a startup cost. Instructional materials startup cost, that's for those things that like blocks, costumes, all those things that are involved with early childhood education, that takes quite a bit. And so those startup costs there. The furniture and non-instructional supplies is $45,000, which is $15,000 per classroom. That's for our desk, or tables, chairs, easel, water table, things like that. And then transportation is $32,200. That's the number that was significantly reduced from the budget request. After my meeting with Ledgmere, we had a discussion about pre-K transportation. Currently in our contract, we have routes, buses that are not on the road for a variety of reasons. Those buses, adding them to our fleet, we think we can transport pre-K kiddos using our existing fleet. It may require some additional monitors, which is what that money would fund there, or some additional hours if we need to dismiss pre-K kids early or have a different schedule. So that would accommodate that expenses there. The bottom.
I'll just jump in, that I remember as we were talking about this, I kind of gave Steve a look like, this wasn't something we did on our own. Ledgmere was with us, with Steve, working through all of that. So that gave me a higher degree in terms of looking at how we look at our existing and how we're going to be able to plug this in. So that wasn't something that we did on our own. That was in collaboration with Ledgmere, as they are also looking for us to be able to, how we can make this happen.
And then with the transportation piece, like I said, we did talk to Ledgmere. You know, the routes we currently have in our budget, in our system, so that's what we came up with there. The bottom there is 90,200. Those are one-time expenses. So from the top amounts there, that is what would come off as one-time expenses there. Why don't we go to the next slide? And Cheryl, I'm going to talk through this and I'll let you jump in, or did you want to talk about it? Okay. So the impact on the local budget. So if you look at total pre-K, the expenses for pre-K are expansion are $540,800. Current pre-K program of that would be $236,800. And the additional pre-K would be $304. If we look at the subsidy, the next row, total pre-K subsidy is $589,346. Of that, $305,983 is for the current pre-K. And for the new pre-K, we have $283,363. Now that is included in that subsidy allocation that we received, the 900 and something. That's within that 900 and something, that 283 there.
What Steve is saying there, remember this year, we received increased subsidy, separate from the grant.
Yeah.
And so that was, if you looked at that increased subsidy, how much of that was dedicated to pre-K? That's what you have.
So if you look at the bottom row, so if we expand pre-K, we have our current pre-K, based on the revenue, this year, we would have 48,546.
In income. An additional, it's a net income. The expenses are less than the revenue.
Right. If we just kept our current pre-K and did not expand, our revenue would be 69,183. And if we expand with the new pre-K, an estimated cost of 20,637 to the local. Now keep in mind that pre-K, you may say, wait a minute, how are we making money with pre-K? You think about, we had a half-day program at SRTC, right? And so we had 32 students, we're receiving subsidy for all of those 32 students, but we were only paying one teacher and one ed tech. So the half-day program is why we're making, had some revenue there. And also think about our relationship with Head Start. Now, what's not in there is all those other expenses that you have that pre-K is part of. So the heats, the lights, the administrators, the administrative assistants, all that, the custodial fees, all that stuff that's embedded, that's not, we haven't pulled that out separately just for pre-K. So, you know, there is an impact there that 48,546 covers. That's just not captured there. If you look at down the road, so 2023, 2024, when the grant goes away, we're looking at what are the expenses that we're left with? About 185,000, that's our estimate. Basically, it's those ed tech positions and some supplies and a little bit of transportation money. Potential additional revenue. Because this year, they based our EPS allocation, they based it on 82 students. Because we were not at full enrollment because of COVID, we had less money devoted to our EPS this year. So if we have a full enrollment next year, in October, we potentially could have 102,592 additional revenue that we would get to support pre-K. Do I think we would get full enrollment? What is our likelihood? I think we'd be pretty close to full enrollment, I think.
So this is where I'll jump in a little bit. Hot off the press, we actually got at 3:15 this afternoon an updated ED 279 if we added the additional 14 students for pre-K from the 82 to the 96. We'll, instead of 102,592, we'll actually get 129,859. So that's an additional revenue, and we can get that this year too. That's why we added it to our current year, ED 279, so that if we get those full 96 students, we'll get the full benefit in our subsidy this year. If we didn't add them this year, we wouldn't get that money. So we added them to the ED 279.
That last part's important, okay? If we didn't add them this year, we wouldn't get them even if we went over in terms of the enrollment of what we had. Remember, you're looking at 96 spots. When we met with the DOE last Thursday, that's where I was kind of saying, whoa, wait a minute, we're kind of getting shortchanged here. And that's when they said that we had the ability, if we felt we could fill those 96 slots, that we'd want to get the revenue this year for those 96 slots, and that we could. So that wasn't just us talking with the pre-K. Cheryl pursued that, and we were able to get that updated on the 279 to show our revenue figure. So the revenue that we're going to be getting is higher today than it was when we first started this process back on January 24th.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that's important, to, especially as we start to look ahead, going ahead into the future sustainability with that. So right now, that's going to change some of those numbers because it was hot off the press.
Yes, so that number, the 82,608, which is the additional local, hey, Beth.
No, I already changed it, Beth.
It's going to be 55,341 instead. So,
So Steve, at that revision, you're looking at approximately $577 out-of-pocket expenses per student for the 96 students once we're kicking in the 55,000 at the local level. So, my question would be, the impact that pre-K has on our special ed services, $577 seems like a bargain, if it means that we can circumnavigate services once they enroll in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade.
Potential, yep. Yep.
but remember, we get special ed 2 years after it actually, the expense. On the ED 279, we get our special ed portion always lags by 2 years.
This pre-K subsidy will be for what to start. So for example, and this happened, I think, a couple of years ago, if we don't hit our 96 people, we don't get to keep that money. The DOE is going to come back and then take that money and say, they'll only give us for the number of people that we have.
They'll take away, they won't add.
Yes. And that's why we made this change here, because if we didn't add them and we did get to that full enrollment, we wouldn't be seeing the appropriate subsidy beyond what we had.
We would lose $129,000, so we figure we should err on the side of caution and put it in there.
Does Acton have a pre-K?
Yes.
Then that stops my follow-up question.
Small enrollment. So I think if you're looking at, we try to boil this down, if you look at what the impact is going to be for this year on the local budget, it's going to have an expense of $48,546, but when you actually look at how we get some increased revenue now on our current pre-K, that would offset that, and now it actually brings it down to only a impact of $20,637.
Actually, that's $48,546 in revenue, and you add another $129,000. So we're gonna be, not on. So that's $48,546 of revenue for the local pre-K, and we're gonna add another $129,859 to that, which is going to bring it up to just over 200, or just under 200 some odd thousand, right? Adding it quick, it'll be like 175-ish. So that money goes towards our overhead to pay for the building and all that stuff.
You lost me.
Lost
What's
me
the
too.
bottom line? The bottom line.
bottom line.
After the subsidies and the grants, because it's really, from what I'm hearing, I know that we're saying 96 students, but we for years have had already 32 at Head Start and 32 at SRTC.
Correct.
So the new students is 48.
Yes. So the total pre-K, even with the old pre-K system and the new, added together, we're gonna make 48,549, plus the 129 that we just added, 129,000. So we will make $178,405 on pre-K. Now, we have to remember, the expenses do not show any overhead for buildings or anything like that, so that money goes towards the overhead. And you're still confused?
So you're saying we're making money by keeping pre-K? We're not losing? Because that's not my understanding from the other meetings.
Yes, we're making money off pre-K. And a lot of it is Head Start.
So making money at the 96 students.
No, we will.
Yes.
Yes,
When
we
if we
will.
were at full 96, we're going to be
On both.
running in the black.
Yeah, and I
Additional.
would say the disadvantaged kids portion is what makes a good chunk of the money for the new pre-K, because our disadvantaged kids percentage is so high, we get an additional 70,000 just for that. So that's a fair amount. So out of that 283,000, 70,000 of it is for because of disadvantaged kids, which means all that work we do to do free and reduced lunch, or what used to be free and reduced lunch, is what gave us an extra 70,000.
Economically disadvantaged.
Economically
I
disadvantaged.
had one more question, Matt. Let's play devil's advocate. What would happen if we had more than 96 kids? I knew this was going to be on the agenda, and I was just walking through my living room the other day, and the news was on, and I heard on the news, and I don't know which district it was, but they were saying that the lottery was coming out for pre-K. And I stopped to try to hear where it was, and it had already come on. And so that would basically told me that there's going to be a need. How would we handle that?
So it's right now. So what we've done in the past here is we've put advertisements out, and we have a waiting list. Since I've been here, this year we did not have a waiting list. My first year we had a waiting list, and it was about a couple, 2 or 3. And what happened is we had kids move out, and we were able to get them in. Districts that have a lottery, what happens is parents register for the lottery, you sign up for the lottery, and then you have sort of buckets you have to fill. And so one of the buckets, because you want the population of pre-K to mirror what you have for demographics in your classroom. So we may have, let's say, 20% of the slots are designated for students that have special education needs. Maybe 50% of the slots are devoted to students that are economically disadvantaged. And then the other bucket is everybody else. And so what happens is you take, just like that, you take a lottery, you pull the person's name, what bucket do they fill? You fill that slot, and then you go on to the next one. And so that's how you fill. And so oftentimes there is a waiting list. once programs are up and established, they're oftentimes the waiting list.
So I knew, as we were coming into this meeting, Cheryl flagged me down with that new number. So I think that changes everything, not only in terms of what we're looking at for sustainability down the line, but it also talks about now and in this year, in terms of what the impact is going to be financially. We do have to hit the 96. We have to fill every spot in doing that. Is that correct? Is that correct?
They won't take any money away from us if we meet the 96. So that's what our target is.
So this is definitely a big difference from the other meetings that we've had regarding pre-K, in my opinion, because it was, from what I was hearing, was that there's a cost, obviously there's a cost for everything that we have, and now I feel like I'm hearing opposite. Now we're going to be not in the red, we're going to be in the black, as you just said, to have pre-K. My concerns, and let me be clear, because I feel like people don't think as a pediatric nurse, a mom of 5 and all my kids going to pre-K, I'm 100% a supporter of pre-K, okay? So I feel like people might not be thinking that, but I am. Because obviously with the patients that I have, pre-K is beneficial. But with that said, knowing that we have 3,000 other students in this district, that's really where my concern is. I know that you talked about, we're going to be talking at some point about spacing, but also, 3 of my 5 kids needed services with the child development services. And so when I hear that they're coming in, with these services, knowing that these services are pretty difficult to get right now, not at the home setting or in the daycare setting. My concern is about the students that we already have in the elementary schools. Are those services going to be thinner because they will be pulling from our OT, our PT, and the speech that the current kindergarten, first and second and third graders are receiving? Or this extra money that you're saying that we're going to be getting from, if we do approve the pre-K, will that money be going towards additional support staff for those students? Because, as just what I do as a profession, the need for more of those support services right now for the little ones is going to be higher. And that's just me saying it with no sort of data in my background, just from what I'm seeing at work.
So there had been some talk a while back about CDS moving their services over into the school department services anyways. That has died down. We haven't heard a lot about that. I worry that that's part of down the line, that as they come in, there's going to be an impact and a strain on your current services. I think that's very realistic, that for us to expect people right now, we have people out there in pre-Ks that are not associated with the schools or associated with the schools that they're not receiving those services. So you can look at it through that lens, or you can have them come into our schools and realize that there more than likely is going to be some type of impact for that.
So that's my concern, is the current students that are getting those services, that they will get less, because there's only so much you can do in a school day, right? There's only, if we have the same amount of staff and the little ones, 30 minutes, if you're getting speech for 30 minutes, let's be honest, you're really only getting a percentage of that 30 minutes of speech or OT or PT by the time you walk them down to the classroom and this and that. So, when I'm hearing it's 48 students that are very important, and 16 in each school, it's really down to that for me, is pulling from the services that are already thin.
I think, Matt and I were talking today, and Cheryl, what's my reservation, or, something that I wonder or worry about, and it's, it is the services that CDS will provide, because right now in the homes, you mentioned that CDS is having difficulty providing those services for families, finding those folks, but I think they're committed, to provide services to youngsters, and we asked that question a couple of calls ago when we were on the DOE, like special education services, students who need speech or OT, how does that provide it? It's provided through CDS. Is it going to pull from our folks that we have in our buildings? The answer we got at the time was no. Like Matt said, CDS is still separate. It's not part of public schools right now. So in pre-K program we have at SRTC right now, CDS comes right in. And they're able to deliver those services, so it has no impact on our services within the school system. I would assume and hope that is going to be the similar situation that happens when pre-K comes into our public schools. But we haven't experienced it yet. From all indications, from what we're being told, CDS is going to deliver the services. Do we get that down this 2-3 years down the road and that changes? That's yet to be seen, but for next year, what we've been told and what, from my understanding, is CDS will be delivering the special education services there.
And as you mentioned, Amy, in your profession, what you're seeing that increase. And I think when Stacy Bissell comes to talk about special education on Wednesday, you're going to see the same type of thing that we're starting to see. What we'd be looking at, maybe average referrals right now of our incoming kindergarten students, you're going to see that number is higher than it has been before. And I think with everything that's going on, that's going to be understandable.
I think, I think when you look at what the cost will be to the local taxpayers down the road next year, there is a cost there. There is an increased cost there. I just did the rough math. It's about $50,000, I think, the cost to the local taxpayers. And so there is a cost there. I think about what's the cost benefit right now.
Right.
And
So
I
there
think-
is a cost. That's why I was like, there's a cost, but I'm like,
Well, you got to think some of it's being paid by the grant.
Yeah.
And so some of those costs are going to come back on our books
Yeah,
with the
I-
additional revenue.
Just to be clear, what's the impact on the local budget this year?
This year, it's an income to us
Right.
It's
because of
revenue
that
this year.
additional 129. Before that, it was, what was it?
$20,000 expense.
$20,000.
But with the additional revenue that we just found out this afternoon, there's no cost next year, but the year after there is cost.
Yeah.
I just had a quick point on something that Amy was mentioning, that taking additional services away, or because having the pre-K in there, but whether we do it now or do it the following year, if we didn't have the pre-K, those kiddos that are coming in as pre-K are going to need it as kindergarten. So we're really not, all we're doing is just waiting a year and not helping out where they could get help as a kindergartner. Because I had a conversation, and I mentioned it to Jonathan, with a kindergarten teacher and a first grade teacher, long-term, one 5 years, the other one long-term, and they're both advocates of the program because they do see the need of the pre-K that they're doing as a kindergarten teacher. They're doing pre-K work for a majority of the work for the year because the kids are just not ready to be kindergartners when they come in. And that's just where it is in Sanford, what we deal with in Sanford. And it's, that's why I'm an advocate for the program, because if we can help out 5 students, 10 students, I think it's the right thing to do.
And I think as being a building administrator, when we had kindergarten, they came into our school. We spent the first 4 months getting to know them, helping them understand this is school and this is how we do school. And I think about, you get those kids as pre-K, how valuable that is, because by the time, if you have them for pre-K and they stay with you, they get to K, they know how to do school. You're not spending those first 4 months learning how to do school. with that. So,
So Steve, realistically, a kindergarten teacher really is doing that, correct?
Oh,
If they hadn't
absolutely,
gone to some
absolutely, yeah.
type of program, if they're coming in fresh with our program for several months,
Yeah.
it's just what is school?
I mean, kindergarten teachers do that now, but the problem is when kids enter kindergarten, you have the haves and you have nots. You have those kids that have had rich life experiences, that have had opportunities to interact with other kids in a meaningful setting and have had some experiences. And then you have children that, for a variety of circumstances, have not had that opportunity. And so when you put them all together, you're expecting everybody to start at the same point and move forward. And so you have kids in our kindergarten classroom that they need to learn how to do school. That's what they need. They need to learn how to interact with others. And then you have those kids that they're academically, they're ready to go. And so it's meeting kids where they're at, and it's very hard and challenging when, as a kindergarten teacher, they have a special gift in
So
how to
those
do that.
ones that are ready to go, you're actually pulling them back.
In a way.
Because in that, I mean,
Yeah.
in a way, you're pulling them
Yeah.
back because there's only one teacher and trying to, you can't do all things to all kids, so it's really dragging them back a little bit. Can't quantify it, but I would say you probably are because you got to be focusing on the other half of the students.
To a certain extent, yeah.
To a certain extent,
To a certain
right.
extent, yeah.
I mean, just, I don't know where I am, to be honest with this, but just from a numbers standpoint, when I keep looking at it, because next year, we already know that those kindergartners that are coming in are going to really still, I mean, they haven't had a normal life since what, they were 2 years old? So they're already coming in, and they're already going to be coming in with some challenges in the sense, and so that's where I just keep coming back to, is just like, I'm sorry to keep rehashing it, but that's 16 students for each school. The following year, when they are in a kindergarten class, out of those kindergarten classes, if we go and say we have got 5, you're going to have 3 of those pre-K students be dispersed amongst their kindergarten classes the following year. So although it'll impact those 3 students, or that teacher by 3 students that have had the Sanford pre-K program, is it next year fair to the incoming kindergartners that really have, we're hoping that the pre-Kers next year that enter will have some sort of a normalcy here in the next few months, back to reality, that they will rebound, I guess. Do I make sense as I talk? I'm just, it's the kindergartners next year that I am the most concerned about, just from what I'm seeing, yeah.
And that's, that, we'll spend decades figuring that out. There'll be millions of books written about it. So I don't think you just have, teachers will keep trying to
Yeah.
make all students equal. I think, look, you all have to make the dollars work. I feel better now financially than I did coming into today's meeting. I hope, and you hope, you're all right about that. But it would appear that if we're off by 50,000, pick a number, and we commit to pre-K, once you commit, you're all in. So if you're short 50,000 by the time we all vote and the budget committee approves and the city council approves, you've got to now find that 50,000 somewhere else. And that is troublesome because we don't really want to cut anywhere else. So once you commit to pre-K, there's no turning back.
And I think if you look at, we've had these discussions about pre-K. It's been part of our budget the last few years, and it gets floated out there. But at the end of the day, when you start looking at what that cost is going to be and the impact on the budget and the impact of how it's going to take away something that is currently in the budget in order for us to have that, then that's where you usually find out people would say, I don't support, I'm going to recommend that we don't fund pre-K, not because we don't think it's useful or helpful. It becomes down a situation of what we have. This year, I think the economics are more in our favor in terms of when we have for the grant, there's some risk there. We do have to get all of our seats filled. And then I think you can also see what the risk is going forward with that as well, as far as what the impact is for us to be able to come back and make sure that we're meeting the projections that we have.
Amy was mentioning about 3 or 4 kids going into each class. I actually think it's going to be double, because now you have to include your Head Start and your SRTC, so it's actually between 6 to 8, plus then you have any that went to private sector pre-Ks, which should hopefully also be similar. But you'd have at least 6 to 8 kids probably in each class that have gone through Sanford for a year.
I stand corrected.
So I think-
I didn't do all the 90.
Well, you were focusing
now
on
you're
you were
focused on-
focusing on the new 48, but let's not forget what we already had in place there with it. Steve, do you want to talk?
Sorry, Jen had a,
Yep.
I just have a comment. I mean, it's incredibly simple to me. The money is here now, that hasn't been available previously for a program that historically data-driven pays dividends. The admins want it. I love that John Rue is talking to teachers. He's hearing that teachers want it. It has a minimal impact in projected future for our taxpayers. And, space isn't really my wheelhouse. That's your guys' wheelhouse. So it's not for me to really worry about the space for pre-K. If you say you can house pre-K, then you can house pre-K. If your admins say they can house pre-K, then they can house pre-K. And I do empathize with, like Amy's talking about the incoming kindergartners, but there's hurt all the way around, and it's like sometimes you just have to pull the Band-Aid off, and it's like, this is an incredible amount of money that I see as a gift for our community. I like the conversation that's centered around, the impact that students who are behind have on the whole, and the goal would be that programs such as pre-K help us down the line. And at some point, we have to invest in that, because if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to keep getting what we're getting. And, it's crappy that we're in the middle of a pandemic, but this is the time that it arrived.
That might be a good segue into space, because I think that's important for us to be able to share with you what that looks like.
I'm sorry, hold on one second. John, did you have something else you wanted to say?
We've come a long way in the last hour. Can you, it's still the substitute / ed tech staff shortage that concerns me also. So is that, again, you've got to run the schools. We just guide you. Are you comfortable there?
I can answer that for you. I
you
can.
substituting?
No, with all the kids going into the pre-K, we'll now get the mothers back in the working roles, and we can have more ed techs in the school district.
They have toddlers that are still home.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
We had talked about, if you notice in our projections that we had done, there's a few positions right now that are being absorbed as for terms of the enrollment. So in a basic sense, those would be some situations that we could look at those people, if they have the proper certifications, to also be able to transition into those spots.
Yeah.
So we've thought about the same thing, and I don't think for us, at least, we're looking at staffing as a major concern. I wouldn't be surprised if you see some moving around possibly of people coming from the private sector wanting to come to us, or even the Head Start people who might want to transition over into those positions that we're doing into the schools.
John?
Transportation, pre-K, these kids are getting smaller and smaller. Same buses?
We have options with pre-K. We can have them ride regular transportation with our kids, our K through 4 kids. Have them sitting in the front. They do need a special harness to sit in. If there's 1 or 2 kids on the bus, a monitor would not be needed. We don't necessarily need to put a monitor on the bus. But if there's 6 or 7 pre-K kiddos on the bus, we would want to consider putting a monitor on. That's where some of that transportation expense comes in. So that is an option. The other option is we could have them come in at regular time with everybody else, go home early, like at 2 o'clock. That's an option. And so there's a variety of options that we could use for transportation with that.
Do you have any other ideas, Steve, for staffing in terms of, is that a concern or is that legitimate?
I will say
in terms-
early childhood staffing is a concern in the private sector. As you look at private daycares, that is a concern, but in the public sector, in public schools, bringing pre-K in, that's not a high concern of mine. Because I think we're going to find people out there that are interested in coming and working in our programs as ed techs and teachers. I think we have some folks internally that would be interested in it. And certification, there's folks can work to get their certification if they already have a teaching certificate. So in terms of people in the classroom, I don't have a concern.
Do we want to move over to space now, just so we can, that's a concern, and Steve, do you want to share what we're looking at from a space perspective?
So from a space perspective, our schools, because of COVID-19, we spread folks out. And so with spreading folks out, that space has been hard to come by. But over at MCS, they have identified a pre-K classroom that was built for pre-K, so they're all set with space next year.
I'll interrupt. Just prior to COVID, when we did our elementary reorganization, each elementary school was looking to have 2 classrooms for pre-K. The goal way back when was to try to make sure we had 6 classrooms, 2 in each elementary school. So by us not having pre-K this year, we're using those spaces for our COVID to be able to space everyone out. Okay, so that's the mindset I want you to come in with, was prior to COVID, we had 2 identified, two classrooms. Now with COVID, those classrooms are being used currently. And Steve, I'm sorry, give the update. Did you start with MCS?
MCS, yep. So MCS, they have a space that's been identified already. They have room. Over at Pride, they again have space. They have a room that's been identified. Over at CGL, that's the one school that's a little bit more, we have to do some problem solving around. We will be able to create space. The question is, how do we do that? And so there are some options that we have. We have the possibility, depending on a kindergarten enrollment, we could look at that as possibly adjusting the number of kindergarten teachers there. That would be a possibility. We could look at moving a whole classroom of kindergarten over to Pride Elementary School that has room to keep those class sizes even. As a spring goes on here, if we have people move out or move in, we may be able to make some adjustments there. Looking at office spaces for folks. Could we move somebody's office over here to create a classroom? And so there's options over at Carlam. We just don't know at this time what it's going to be with that. But all 3 administrators say, we have space, we'll make it work to add the pre-K program.
And one thing also for us to be right up front is if we were to take a kindergarten class at Carl J. Lamb, to free up that classroom, we'd have to redistribute those kindergarten students probably to Pride or MCS. And if you're doing that, in essence, you're taking 1 student pretty much to add to every one of those kindergarten classes, so your student-to-teacher ratio bumps up by 1. So as we look at it, it works out well at Pride and it works out well at MCS. Those are some things that those spaces we have now, we can take those spaces and those other people can be relocated. At Carl J. Lamb, it becomes a little bit more problematic because of not having that space readily available. It means some problem solving, and it needs some things for us to be able to do. And as Steve said, there's a variety of different options that we may be able to use, but a lot of that would probably be, let's wait and see what enrollment looks like for kindergarten. Let's look and also see what it looks like as far as other people moving in and moving out. That might also free up some space.
The only other thing we didn't mention, An important part of teaching is curriculum. And so we didn't mention curriculum tonight, but in terms of the assessment, we'll have to purchase an assessment tool for kids. But the curriculum, we have options there as well. The state of Maine offers a free curriculum. It's called PreK for Me. And so that's an option we explored at our last meeting. We explored. Looks pretty good. Districts around us use it. There's been a lot of success there. But that is a free open source curriculum that comes with training and support from the Department of Ed. So that's a positive in our favor as well that I just wanted to mention.
Anybody else have any thoughts or any?
Not to jump, the horse in front of the, what do they call that? What do they say that?
Putting the cart before the horse?
When there's talk about spacing and the future, and when you said earlier, Steve, most districts, which makes sense, you would start small and work your way up. With the space that we have right now and knowing that Sanford is going to continue to grow, and the thought of, 5 years down the road with a preschool, with, eventually wanting the goal of all preschoolers in Sanford to be able to attend, clearly there is not enough room in the 3 elementary schools. So is that any discussion about that and where, maybe pre-K going into another building in the future? I mean, I don't even know if conversations, but it's just like, when you think about eventually if you want it to grow, it grows where?
So as we look at, with these ESSER positions, so as we project it out, we're really looking end game to have 2 pre-K classrooms in each one of our buildings, and then over at SRTC. So if you look at that, if that's our goal, we add 1 next year. We're only looking for 1 more classroom space. And when the ESSER positions go away, that's when the pre-K space would become available. Does that mean?
Classroom sizes get bigger.
Yes.
Right.
That's your trade-off. As you look at us coming in and more people moving to Sanford and the ESSER funds going away, you are going to be looking at class sizes going up anyways, unless we want to fund more positions to kind of keep it the way it is. If not, you're going to see class sizes go up, and that's going to be not only looking at pre-K, but any other people moving into Sanford in terms of increased enrollment with that. Have we done any studies or anything beyond that? No, we haven't, but part of that is because we were already preparing down the line for class sizes to go up with the ESSER positions to go away for that.
John, did you have something you wanted to?
I suspect, and I know, John, lots of people listened to the presentation on the new high school and funding it and all the money's going into the 3 kindergarten, the K-12, K-6 schools, K-4. 3 K-4s in high school, in the middle school. So I suspect the math was done for square footage and students and ratios that pre-K was going to be in those schools somehow, some way.
I would add, when those were done, I don't even think anyone knew what COVID was. And I think as you look at COVID now, you now have, we've all seen what's happened in terms of people wanting to move to the state of Maine. You've got people wanting to move to southern Maine in terms of Cumberland and York County. So I think that is probably very real, that as we were looking at where those pieces were, I don't think anyone was going to be expecting to see some of the growth that we have. Now, we also look at some housing as being very limited and very tight in terms of that as we look at it. I know there's some things going on at the city right now with some other housing developments that are going on, and in talking with City Manager Buck, he's asked about those as they kind of look at doing some of their projections to say, I think you're going to be seeing some increased student enrollment coming back, and that's not just looking at a pre-K or a kindergarten, that would be through the whole piece. And that's something that we've talked about, that do we have the ability to take on some of that? I would say once, without us, with the ESSER positions and how we've stretched everything out, that would be challenging, but in the long run, I think we'd be able to come back and impact that to accommodate some of those increases in terms of enrollments.
Yeah.
Well, I sit here and I think of, okay, we're looking at future uses for Willard School and for Lafayette School. And so right now, we have kind of held on to those because of the idea of COVID and where we might need that space to be able to come back and do that. I think when you hear on Wednesday, when we talk about the expansion of the bridge, one of the things that we're looking at is having that program go over to the old Willard School. And that's something that would be able to have us come out of Anderson Learning Center to be able to come back and do that. So I put that out there because if some people were thinking, oh, the Willard School, there might be some repurposing of that, looking at expanding the bridge. There also may be some things in there that I don't know what that means for Anderson Learning Center. And if that was something where Sanford Community Adult Education was going to be also looking for a new home, in terms of that, it fits well at Willard on the, in that campus, the school campus type of situation with that. So I would think that that might take Willard off the table in terms of a space for us to be able to use any expansion of that if needed. So I wanted to put that out there just so in case some people are thinking, oh, we've got that space for Willard to be able to use that.
Jen, you had something?
I just wanted to say, Steve, I appreciate you bringing up the reminder of the SR fund positions, because I hadn't really thought of that perspective previously about, obviously those positions were used for spacing purposes for COVID-19. And, realistically, if you followed the school budget process, the reality of us funding all of those positions at the local level once SR goes away is, no one has a crystal ball, but if you've seen it previously, it's probably slim to none, which to me is more of an argument of why pre-K is needed, because as those class sizes go up, the more kids that we can matriculate into kindergarten, school ready, just makes those entire learning environments for all of those classrooms that much more functioning. And the unfortunate reality is those class sizes are going to go up sooner than later. As we've been discussing this budget, we know when those funds are going to retire, and it's millions and millions of dollars that it will be a hard sell at the local level to get those funded locally.
That's it? I'd like to say that I don't know where I'm at with all of this either. I see both sides, and I don't think that any way of looking at it is simple. I hear everything that Jen is saying, and I hear everything that Amy's saying, and I think basically what's going on is, it's like with everything in education. We're never at a point where the decisions are easy, and we're never at a point where we've got nothing else to consider and we can all jump off the cliff together. And we're either going to be preemptive and hope that starting this pre-K program makes it easier down the road, or we don't, and we stay doing what we're doing, which Jen said, if we keep doing what we're doing, nothing is going to change. But I don't think either option is easy. I think that what we need to do is agree to disagree, or agree that we're all going to grab hands and jump down the cliff and be preemptive. But anyway, it's just some thoughts that I'm having, because I don't think either way of looking at it is simple. And I commend you guys for all the work that you're doing and all the research and all the collecting of opinions and information and so on and so forth.
Can I-
Can I just?
Go ahead, Amy.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, the same struggle you're having here tonight as a board, it's the same struggle we've had internally.
Right.
We've reached a point to bringing it forward, and this is the direction we think we should go. But, even last year, and so it's not a normal, it's a normal process to go through that we've gone through ourselves and bring this for you guys to look at. So.
Well, it's funny because John says you've spoken to staff. I've actually spoken to staff that say the opposite. So it's funny, we're talking to different perspectives within the school as well, in the elementary level. So it's funny what you're hearing, what I'm hearing. So just to be clear before we end this, next school year, there is zero impact to the local budget because of all the subsidies and the grants and such. The impact to the local budget would be the following school year. Correct.
If we get 96 people.
If we get 96.
I don't think that's going to be a problem. I already
I
can tell
don't
you about
feel like it is
50
either.
that'll sign up tonight if you'll let them. So
I
don't
feel,
think that's
I feel
gonna be a
confident,
problem.
but I also feel I need to mention that.
Yeah.
Right, and the state, and I just, went back and I was reading the email she sent me with the new subsidy. She says it does get reconciled, and if you have them in with less students, that money gets taken away, and which we know.
But being positive thinking,
Well, I
because
think,
we're going to get 96 students, you're going to get
I think we are.
180. But of the 250 or whatever there is going to be the following year, that there will be no impact to the budget. Because at the last meeting we had, I think I had written down 32,897.
right,
Okay.
And when we say next year, we mean 22, 23, right?
Correct.
So the impact will be felt 23, 24.
And a roughly 50,000.
And our estimate there is,
55,341.
Okay.
But we're, and I don't think we actually went to this comment, it's at the bottom of that same slide, that we're going to be looking for potential grant opportunities for that
Yeah.
to help us.
Yeah.
And we don't know what's going to come for, another
I
expansion.
mean, I kind of see it as, and maybe I'm comparing apples to bananas right now, but in the sense of like Title I, there's Title I that covers that. The English as a second language, that is fully covered typically as well. Am I wrong? No?
Nope,
Okay,
that comes through
scratch that.
subsidy.
We have to
that comes through subsidy because we do not have enough student population
That's
to
right.
be able to take that through title funds. At this current time.
at this current time.
Okay, so we all need to figure out if we're going to be preemptive or,
So this will come to us in a formal school committee meeting as a vote, or no?
For pre-K?
Yeah.
No, I think what I anticipate happening is a lot of information today, process that. Wednesday, we have special education coming, talking about that, and talking about bridge expansion. If you thought pre-K was challenging, you might want to make sure you eat your Wheaties on Wednesday, okay? Because it doesn't get any easier, but that's what we deal with. And so that would be on Wednesday, and then I think we'll take the will of the group, but I think next Monday for the budget workshop is when we then have to start making some decisions and moving some things around in terms of what we want to keep in the local budget and what may have to either get moved into maybe ESSER funds, or if it needs to be something that needs to be cut elsewhere. So I think that's when you can really start to come back to be able to look at the pre-K. This one is different because at least in this first year, when we took pre-K out before, you could see the difference that it was making because you had money going away. This year, in terms of what we have in there, it's not going to be, it's going to have an effect, but it's not going to have an effect on the 2022-23 budget. It's going to be more of what you're looking at down the line.
So Matt,
Right.
are we going to actually have to have a vote to say move forward with this?
I
Or vote to do it
I
or
think
not?
it's just going to be part of our process, because we have to, by February 28th, at our school committee meeting, that's when we're going to have to vote on a budget at our regular meeting to go to the budget committee that Thursday.
Sorry,
So-
So we're voting basically on the budget, not specific, this, because we haven't really technically voted for this, or which we probably won't. So it's just basically.
Yeah, I think it's going to be part of an overall thing in terms of the budget that we're putting through, because there may be some other things that people want to see some shifting around. It could be some things we add, it could be some things we subtract.
I would assume we'd be taking like that page that I show what the percentages are and how it's changed since the 6.5% increase. And either you accept that or you make changes to it or
so we're
whatever.
accepting a budget with pre-K or a budget without pre-K?
Right,
Okay.
yeah,
Or a budget without many different things.
right. You might say, we want to
But-
do this one
because
separate.
Like we've done in the past, we just tell you, basically, we needed it at 2.4, 2.7, whatever that number is, and you guys just came to it, correct?
Right,
Yeah,
because
we're not
current,
telling you what to do, we're just saying, this is where we need to be, and then it's going to go to the budget committee, the budget committee is going to tell us, and then ultimately, it's the city council is going to say, you guys can't have 3.4, you need 1.5, end of discussion, figure out what you need to cut, correct? I mean, that's the
It
process.
does, but this is also important for you to offer in your input in terms of what you're looking for, in terms of what you'd like to think is in the budget and what's not. I think as you can see, we believe that pre-K is something that should be part of this budget, the pre-K expansion. We have an opportunity now. I think everything that's been brought up has been very legitimate in terms of concerns. I don't think there's anything that we haven't also considered, but I think the circumstances are ideal for us. If we don't do this now, I'm not sure we're going to get a better situation going forward to be able to try to help us get this off the ground, get it off the ground right, to expand it, and then also be able to try to sustain it. There's going to be some discussions down the line in future years where we're going to have to be looking at some things where it might have to say, we need some things to be cut. And one of those things that will be added or will be discussed would be pre-K in terms of that. And I don't say that to scare people. I say that it would be a number of things that we would be talking about if we have to find ourselves in those situations.
John, you had a question?
Yeah, Matt, so on the pre-K expansion grant, the last bullet point says grant awards will be finalized in February of '22. Well, we're in February. Do you have to give an answer to somebody saying, we want that? What's that date?
They have not given us a we need to know by this date. We're still working through the process.
I have been very upfront with them to let them know that it's part of our budget deliberations going on right now. We have not made a decision on that. If you remember, the Department of Education wanted to really promote this, and they were trying to have the governor wanted to come to Sanford to kind of promote the program. And I had to politely decline to say, we very much understand the benefits of pre-K. We're very much trying to make that happen, but we also have a responsibility to make sure what we're doing is something that fiscally makes sense for us, and we hadn't made those approvals yet. It is somewhat, right, I don't think they want us dragging it out, but their timeline lines up with ours, knowing that we're going to have a budget on February 28th to be voted on.
Jen?
Cheryl, is it safe to say that from year to year, once the pre-K program is off the ground, we're not looking at it from an expansion perspective, but based on the 96 enrollment, that the local impact to the budget would be between $50,000 and $60,000 annually?
Yeah, I would assume.
Well, that's a good question.
Depends on the rates.
That's
Depends
a
on
good
lot.
question.
Well,
And it all depends on, if you look at our current model,
yes, okay.
that works on, right now in this budget, we made a change to take what we're proposing is the high school SRTC, 2 sessions, we're changing those into 1 session. There's a financial impact for that, okay? Now, if you notice what else we said in there, we also receive revenue with our arrangement with Head Start. Now, it could be one thing that arrangement might continue on and work wonderfully, or that arrangement may go on that those classes are now looking to transition into our schools when we're expanding from 3, 1 in each, to 2 in each. And if we do, there will be a financial impact that we currently don't have now because we collect subsidy and we contract with them. The amount of subsidy we are collecting is higher than what we're contracting them with. If they were to come in to us and that contract went away, you would probably see our expenses and our costs increase in those situations.
John, you look like you have a
The good
thought.
thing is, Cheryl had 90,000, but the quick number is $80,000 to $90,000 of one-time expense that if you didn't do it this year, you at least get desks, chairs, and instructional materials and other things that are going to be in place.
Right, if I remember right, last year when we came forward with the pre-K, that it was going to be a fairly hefty amount that was going to hit the bottom line. But things have changed somewhat, and the number of kids have changed. So it seems more feasible now, especially being our startup costs getting covered by the grant. I think that's huge. I mean, the $90,000 worth of expenses are getting paid by a grant that we won't have to do again.
So are we saying that the possible financial cliffs that could come about from different situations with pre-K, such as expansion or whatever other issues may come up, we're saying that those cliffs are not less important, but they're worth the risk, and we should start pre-K? That's what all of you are saying.
I don't think we're going to get a better opportunity. Now, we've talked internally about that from the timing, and we expect that people see the value and the benefit of pre-K, so I don't think we're going to be in a situation where you're looking at these types of grants going away. I think you're going to see that incentive is going to be there down the line, that it's not just, hey, this is the last year they'll be available. I don't want to paint that picture because I don't think that would be accurate. But in terms of how we're looking at those startup costs and setting up to be able to do that and the financial impact that we have now, knowing that, the advantage was years ago, we also were part of a Department of Education grant for pre-K. And as you looked at that got us into pre-K, but it was not sustainable for us as we were going forward. And so we actually withdrew ourselves from that grant. We withdrew ourselves from that grant. But we were able to continue with pre-K. We did that through the high school and SRTC. And we also made an arrangement with our Head Start. Both of those arrangements have worked out very well, but they also had a financial benefit to the district that we have been the beneficiary of that, and then that is coming back into our local budget that's going back into helping in other places. So you don't want to lose sight of that, because as we come in, now there's going to be some time for us to have to catch up on that. And that's what we're starting to do now, where there's going to be, when is that going to happen? If we're ever going to be able to come back and do it, I don't think there's any way around not having some sort of impact to the local, but we look at this year where we don't have anything that would be into it, and next year you look at that where it's going to be something that, when you look at it, every dollar counts, every penny counts, but I also think when you're looking at what we've been able to get and to sustain that program, that's something to be doable as well for that.
Any last thoughts? Amy?
This is actually not about pre-K. Cheryl and Matt and Steve and Beth, when we on Wednesday, when we talk about the bridge, is it possible that we're given the bottom line right away? So I can, that's how my brain works. So this is what, before Stacy presents, we can see what
I
it is.
think what I would like to do is, how we've kind of structured that is not bring that into this part of it yet, keep it separate within where the bridge program expansion is, to kind of show where those numbers are on that before we bring it over into this piece, because there are some moving parts there that I am not as, I don't think we're as comfortable with those right now. And so we'd want that to be able to come back through our discussion and then have people be able to weigh in on that to say, okay, let's look at what that is and put that impact to it. We can try to get you some preliminary figures, but I'm not sure it's as cut and dried right now as it looks like that we have with the grant that we already have, because some of these are talking about what we're looking at for our current people who are in outside placements who would now transition into this expansion of the bridge program. There's also some people who have talked about tuitioning kids in to that particular program. And then there's some people who we don't currently have in an outside placement who could still benefit from a program like this that we are currently have within the district. And so you're not going to see as much financial benefit for that on a sheet like this, but you're going to realize that that is going to help us in the long run in terms of that. So I don't want to make a promise to you that I can't keep right now in terms of getting you that list. We'll have a presentation, and I think after that, that will help everyone get a comfort level of where people are at in terms of what that's going to look like for the bottom line. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I guess it was more for me, I don't necessarily need to know what the percentage it would be to increase or the percentage for it to be decreased. It would be more just this is what we think it might cost. This is what it costs typically to send somebody out of district.
We'll have that.
And then there's the always the benefit of some of the kids that are currently in the schools that really should not be and should be at a bridge, because there's a great benefit within the building that's
as part of
no
Stacy's
cost.
presentation, you're gonna see numbers. We're not gonna
Yeah.
attach names to those, but
Right.
you're gonna see numbers that will help you with that understanding to say, currently, this is how many people are in outside placements at this amount that we think would be coming in. This is what we anticipate our staffing costs to be for us to expand the bridge. And I'll let you know right now, those estimated have been at the highest level. The most experience, the highest health insurance. And so we've got that, and now we're trying to look at giving you a better idea of okay, here's what those costs are, here's what it looks like for us in terms of a revenue. But I don't think it's going to be revenue neutral, and I don't think it's going to be a revenue increase. Yeah.
Amy, John just left the room, but I remember several years ago, not that many, 3 years ago, during one of the superintendent's opening comments to the teachers, and we may have talked about this, Stacy said, hey, I'd like my special ed folks to stay behind in the old high school cafeteria, and John and I said, let's sit and listen. That was a third of the staff. Every staff, teacher, ed tech in the district, all of them were in the cafeteria for opening comments. A third of them remained behind. So 85% of our budget is staff, is salary and benefits. So when you think special ed, never mind the outside placement costs at Sweetser, who I'm sure they also have some increased costs. I imagine they've sent you some memos recently. So those are going up. salaries and benefits are going up to a third of the staff, so special ed is big.
On Wednesday, we plan to give you talk about the expansion of the bridge. We're going to start with the why. Why do we think we want to be able to do this? And there's a number of reasons that we feel are going to benefit our students and benefit our district. But I can tell you, the first one and the second one and the third one is not the fiscal responsibility of it. We think it's going to be partly because of what we think this can do in terms of us. We've seen what the bridge does at the older ages. I think what you're going to see from Stacy is you're going to see a changing landscape out there when it comes to these outside placements. The costs are going up. They've got some that are even closing in terms of being able to come back and do that. So for us, I think that there's going to be opportunity there for us that I think is going to have some of those advantages I talked to, but I also think it's going to be some of those things that we might not be put a dollar amount to, at least initially, right off for it.
Okay. Any last thoughts? We've got a meeting coming up in 5 minutes, so.
6:30.
6:30? Oh, okay. That's right, 6:30.
Any more on pre-K? Do we want to circle back to where we were, at least on this initial sheet that we passed out ahead of time? That was,
It's freezing in here. Yeah, do you or Cheryl or Steve or Matt have anything else that you want to add to this?
we do not. This is just kind of organizing our thinking of where things are at now. Cheryl gave an increase on the expenses. Do we need to adjust that now with where we are with pre-K?
No, pre-K is at the bottom for it brings it to a 3.8% increase if they accept all those changes.
But that also, that is on an expense level. It's not showing our increase in subsidy yet.
No, nope. No, we didn't, revenues on the other side.
What's that?
I didn't include that, no, because that came in like,
This is the expense side.
just expense.
Yep.
Because I know that they were struggling last week with having some of the revenue items attached to the expense, so I'm trying to keep them a little separate. I do have a document I could hand out, but that has those at the bottom.
I like doing that. That helps me. And so I think it's confusing, so now we're trying to keep it separated so you can see what our budget is compared to last year's from an expense side, that you will look at it as being up 3.8%. But like we talked about today, there's going to be some increased revenue for our pre-K that we're also going to be seeing when it comes over to the revenue.
Right. And I don't know if the value has changed for the city too. That would automatically reduce our increase also because of the value, the amount that we net, that we have to get for taxes gets divided by the value of the city. And sometimes their value goes up and it gives you additional revenue if you're at the same rate. So just that impact could actually help us.
But it also could go the other way.
Yeah, it could. But as most of us have seen that the market rates have gone up drastically, so I'd be surprised to see that happen.
Is there anything in terms of Wednesday, we have Wednesday kind of outlined. We'll be reaching out to Shelley Paulus to get an update on health insurance. I'll also try to connect with the city to help us when we start to come in next Monday for our workshop there. Is there anything else that people need to help you in terms of understanding? Is there any other information that you'd like to have to help you as we start to zero in on
I don't,
My only, commentary from experience is be prepared to make some difficult cuts and prioritizing what, it can get a little emotional when if the numbers change. And we don't find out till the 11th hour, I don't know what that is, but just know that if you're committed to pre-K, then something else goes.
Matt, has the city given you any indication?
No, and I have not reached out to them to connect. I plan to do that soon. We didn't have our leadership team meeting in February. Our next one's March, so I'd like to reach out. I know, I think Steve's away, so I'll have to try to navigate that. Okay,
okay.
ready to,
Is everybody happy with everything that happened tonight?
Joyous.
Yes? Joyous. All right, yeah, thank you. Thank you for everything. If there are no more additional comments or last comments, then my recommendation is to adjourn this meeting. Seconded by John Rue, at 6 o'clock.
okay.